I'm taking a little bit of a different approach today, as well as I'd like to do on Wednesday or tomorrow, is going over a little bit of some of the stuff we've got here um, in terms of some of the additional readings. Because the more I'm thinking about it, the more I'm really getting into um, the how y'all are posting. It seems like there's a good portion of people that are very familiar with what's going on within the required readings. But when they get to the additional readings, they're not quite as um, on key with everything there. It can be a little bit of a challenge here. And I want to start with this one right here, the Carmack and Heiss article about theory of planned behavior and intent to use LinkedIn for job searches and professional networking. I like this one in particular, one, because theory of planned behavior is something I've worked with for many years, and it's a theory that I'm very familiar with. But the other thing, obviously we're dealing with what's called personal branding. It's something we really won't get into this class in particular, but it is something that you probably need to be thinking about if you're going to pursue any kind of professional development within social media use. Is how you plan on using these sites, and in this case, LinkedIn. How you plan on promoting yourself. Excuse me, makes a big difference, as well as the potential business you work for as well to make sure that people are looking for you. This also is a good indication for how college students are looking at LinkedIn, and if you plan on opening a business, excuse me, um, and you're catering to hire or to get people involved, this is something of how do we utilize these tools and not waste a bunch of time and money by creating some areas on LinkedIn, so that again we can do things most effectively. And this is a pretty cool article. Now I want to first start out, if you haven't done this before, in terms of read a lot of journal articles, I'll give you kind of a key breakdown as to what I usually look for. If you're not familiar with a lot of the statistics here, this is kind of a brief overview of how you can read some of these. You'll notice as you go through any journal article that the first part of it has an introduction. They don't label it that way typically, but it is an introduction to just kind of say how important the topic is at hand here. The next comes into what's called the literature review. This all has to deal with any previous research that's been done in terms of, in this case, social media, or excuse me, social networking sites. I'm trying to think, they've got LinkedIn here. I think it's mostly social networking sites through this one in particular. But then they go into some research questions. So you'll see right here. This is what you're going to pay attention to, because everything up until that sets it up. Excuse me. So again, these research questions are very important here in terms of how they plan on using the study. Now this one does it a little bit different, because sometimes when we go over these journal articles, they do all the literature review and then they put all the questions at the end. This one in particular found it necessary, and in a good way, I mean, to go in and split up the literature review by parts. And we've got, again, the SNS stuff and then the theory of planned behavior. And I always encourage people to read the intro stuff. When we get into the methods are very important. However, you might not be too familiar with all the stats going in here, but even though it's pretty easy to understand, they mentioned that there's 107 students participating. In this case, we're looking at N equals 43. And basically all that means is it's the percentage, 43, within this 107. So again, N just means the sample, or a portion of the sample. So it's not too hard to understand once you kind of start being able to read everything. It's just kind of a different way of writing. But then it's the percentage to follow. Again, and it's not hard to go through. I don't necessarily say that you have to go in and look through the methods if you don't want to, especially when you get into the results, because a lot of people have trouble with the results, even though I don't see anything in particular correlation table that's too terribly bad. However, again, if you're not used to regressions or correlations or ANOVAs or chi-squares or t-tests, this stuff can seem like gibberish to you. And that's okay. When I was going through my master's degree, I didn't read a lot of the results just because I didn't understand it until I took a statistics class. And if you ever want to learn more about it, I'm happy to talk with anybody about this and get into it. One thing I would focus on is the discussion, because this really does put everything into place of the why. Why do we use this stuff? Why are our results the way that they are? So you start off in terms of your research questions, then you go to your methods, and then it comes to the why, again, your discussion here. So it's a pretty short article. I do like it a lot because this talks quite a bit about theory of planned behavior, which is right here. So I'm going to stay off the article for now and talk a little bit about the theory of planned behavior. And you see within this in particular, there's a couple different things going on here. So we're talking about LinkedIn usage. And when we refer to media, this is what we call a uses and gratifications within media. This happens quite a lot, and it's a theory that's really built under many, many years of discussion when it comes to how we use media. So some of you may use social media for entertainment purposes. Some may use it for news. My grandfather would always use it for stocks, for instance. So he'd watch C-SPAN. He watched like 2 television programs. It was either C-SPAN or Alabama football. That was about it. And again, there were 2 very specific purposes. One was for enjoyment, although depending on the season was depending on how much he actually enjoyed watching Alabama play. But you look at C-SPAN, again, he's using this for informational purposes. In this case, trying to keep his stock at such a level that he is still making money because of it. So this is a very fiscal reason. But you can do it for educational purposes. You can do it for how-to purposes, as some of y'all said, in terms of putting things together, like building projects and so forth. Well, when we get into those uses and gratifications, it talks a lot about why do students use or don't use LinkedIn. And when we're going through the results and the discussion here, one of the things that we see is that students, although believe that they have that LinkedIn is a good site to use, it is something that they know that this is a potential good source for networking, for job purposes, so forth. But it's very little use, so it gets very, very little use, and that's an interesting dichotomy here, because essentially what you're doing is, I know it's good for me, however, I'm not using it. And we see this a lot actually in the theory of planned behavior. So if you look here, now granted, you'll notice that this is someone who's written this in the UK, because they spell it with an I-O-U-R in behavior, and that's most people who work on this. Anyway, so the couple of things that we talk about are these almost cognitive dissonance of, I know it's good for me, but I don't use it. Well, why? When we get into theory of planned behavior, there's a lot of information that deals with this. And basically what I'm saying is it's been tested for many, many different things. So like sunscreen use was one. Again, I know it's good for me, but I don't use it. They've also done seatbelt usage, eating healthy foods, condom use. It's really been a lot in health-related communication in this particular area. So when we look in terms of understanding the purpose of LinkedIn, we look at the attitude. So attitudes are basically a basic belief on what I believe in something. So, but it's usually not to that extremity. So when we look into the variation of persuasion, we usually look at something like attitudes being the lowest, values being stronger, beliefs being something that's core to your existence, to your identity. And an attitude, although will probably have some strength when it comes to your identity, it's something that could be relatively easily changed, given the right circumstance. So, but the key is how do I get from an attitude to an actual behavior? So in this case, we're talking about LinkedIn. That within LinkedIn, how do we take my attitude towards it, which I think is normally a good thing, to actually using it? And it's really interesting in terms of why they may not use it. So why do students may not use their LinkedIn page? And a lot of this will talk about passive use as well as their relationship with their family and friends. This is where subjective norms come in. So subjective norms are typically, excuse me, talking about people who are close in your life, and they can even be groups that would be close in your life. So, for instance, you might have a family member that would be considered a subjective norm. And basically what this entails is, if your mother were to say, oh, I've heard this site, LinkedIn, you might want to use it, or your brother, or your sister, or your friend, or whoever, someone that carries a lot of weight with you. It can also be a group. So maybe you are weary of Facebook and the privacy issues, so you don't want to do a whole lot of networking there. So you eliminate your account and go on LinkedIn in terms of using their particular service because a subjective norm influenced you to do that. So this is kind of the cool thing about this. Now, within perceived behavioral control, again, and this has to do with a little more of the passive and active, because most of what was found in the article is that students use social media very passively, not actively. And it's kind of one of these areas where I would say if you're working along with Facebook or Twitter and you know how to use it, but you're not looking at the data for it. Again, most people think that Facebook and Twitter are measured by likes and loves and all the metrics that you see after each post. And although those are cases, if you were to actually go into the analytics side, which is not hard to do, you would see that there's a lot more to there in terms of impressions, reach, frequency. Those things all exist within these social media sites. Now, when we get in that, and so that's active use. So perceived behavioral control usually looks into the can I do something. So attitudes here is I like something or I dislike something. Subjective norms are some of the influencers, and subjective norms can even be social media influencers if you have that parasocial relationship with them that's strong. And then you get perceived behavioral control, which in this particular case here, again, has to do, can I use LinkedIn? Well, the answer is yes. Obviously you can. But this is where it goes a little bit into talking about whether they can use the more active features. Now, a lot of this will have to do with difficulty. Part of one of the reasons we don't look into analytics is because analytics kind of scares us. And I've talked to multiple students that kind of have this phobia of looking at statistics when it comes to this kind of stuff. Not that anything's there to bite, or once you actually start looking at it, it's not very difficult to understand once you get into it. But it's always these things that once we're hit with it all at once, it's like this overload, and we're almost kind of scared of looking at it. So perceived behavioral control in this case may be that I can do it, but I'm just not going to be active on it. So my intention drops here. So you can see here all these things come into play of why I might use it. I know, for instance, that it is something that I could use. It's going to be helpful. I think the article said it was family and friends that are the subjective norms involved with it in terms of saying that this is a helpful site. So I got 2 in favor here of going into this intention to work on my LinkedIn. But then it may be the perceived behavioral control of I don't feel comfortable with some of the more active features that exist on LinkedIn, partly because I may feel like I haven't worked on it enough to be able to understand it. And and this is kind of this fear of um, this phobia, if you will, of not feeling comfortable to do something, and you kind of have to go outside your box to do this. The other thing that's not mentioned on this one, and it's listed, or if you can see my mouse, some of the models listed right around here, is past behavior. And past behavior will actually link to attitude. It will also link to intention. And it's pretty simple. I mean, it's basically I use past behavior to say if I've done something. So if I've used LinkedIn before, my attitude towards LinkedIn, depending on what it is, could be good. If I liked it, if I got a job off LinkedIn, I probably have a very good experience with it. You could also look at this in other social media sites like dating sites. I'm going a little off topic here, but if I've had good experiences with dating sites, then my attitude towards it shifts because of the past behavior, and it may also affect the intention as well. So, if I've had good experience in getting networking and marketing through LinkedIn, my intention to continue using it will be pretty darn high. Now, with my personal LinkedIn, I haven't gotten a lot of traffic off of it, and that's fine. I know what I need it for, and I know what I use it for. So my intention is relatively low to actually use it, as well as understanding some of the again more active behaviors. And sometimes I feel like I've got better social media. So like I use academia.edu for a lot of my social networking because it deals with a lot of publishing, which is what I do for a living. Aside from teaching, obviously, but this is the kind of thing where you can talk a lot about that past intention. I get a lot of traffic off academia.edu. I get a lot of followers. I get a lot of people talking to me about papers and so forth. And then my attention rises to use this behavior. So again, I would really try to look into, especially the discussion of this paper. I think it's a interesting way to start looking at why we use social media in the first place. Again, it's very uses and gratifications oriented. That would be a really cool study, not study, but theory for you to look up if you're interested. So anyway, I hope that you all have enjoyed talking a little bit about this. Please make sure that you're posting. Talk about this on Twitter if you'd like. I'd be happy to respond to anything you got on that note. Otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you Wednesday. Okay, bye.